Fox is facing some challenges. You've seen MSNBC and CNN do certainly well in recent days and even since the election. But you've also seen Newsmax, which is a much smaller outfit, start to get some traction for its personalities and audiences, fueled in part by people like President Trump saying Fox is disappointing me with all this reporting stuff. So let's go to other places where we can do it. So Fox even removed its 7 p.m. show, which was given by Martha McCallum, a news anchor, not an opinion host, although I'd say she was sort of shows sympathy and consideration to the president beyond what the facts might suggest. And they moved her to more of an exile time-wise to mid-afternoon. And so, you know, all they've done is they basically said, we're going to give yet another hour in the evening when we have larger audiences to opinion hosts. And it's hard to imagine that's going to be a contrary opinion host.
Yeah. They see that the opinion resonates more, you know, but it's, if Fox News is in this pickle trying to figure out whether their opinion or whether their fact-based news, what kind of spot does that put them in compared to some of the other conservative news upstarts? I'm talking about Newsmax. I'm talking about, was it OANN, One American News Network? Mm-hmm. Like those two platforms, it seems as if they have less of that double pressure. I think a lot of folks hearing this episode may not really know about OAN or Newsmax yet. Tell folks who they are.
So let's walk through that. Newsmax is an online conservative outlet that aggregates opinions, has some reporting, a lot of it sort of rewritten from other sources. And Newsmax, several years back, created a TV presence. It's been a money-losing venture. But it's been gaining some steam in the Trump years, access to some Trump people. And I got to tell you, in recent months, as Trump has been banging against Fox's news side, and anyone who really expresses any degree of acknowledgement of the fact that Biden won freely and that you know, his election should be certified and he should take office, Newsmax has made gains. Now, they're still a much smaller operation than Fox, but they can cause Fox pain.
Now, what about the One American News Network? So, like, I don't really know what they are.
I mean, they are a fantastic repository and circulator of off-the-wall conspiracy theories.
Okay.
They justify pretty much any indulgence that Trump wants to any allegation he wants. They went in deep on Biden and Ukraine in ways that even after official government reports and investigations came out, not finding it, you know, they kept going back to Rudy Giuliani, allowing him to make claims that appeared, at least in part, to be based on information and material provided by a guy that Trump's own Treasury Department have said is essentially Russian operatives. These guys are very much, it's not like they've doubled down, they've bet the house on the idea that whatever helps Trump in the moment, however wild the conspiracy theory is, if there's something for them to spin as a tail, they'll do it.
Okay, so then if there are these upstarts challenging Fox from the far right, Newsmax and One American News, and Fox News is now kind of losing compared to outlets like CNN. You know, CNN has been the most watched cable news network since the day after the election, and they're just beating Fox right now. How bad of a predicament is Fox News in? They're being attacked from both sides, and you're kind of losing on both fronts?
I mean, from my standpoint, I would say that Fox on the one hand is crazily profitable, and they've got an incredible brand and loyalty among a lot of viewers, but it's bumpy right now. And I'd also say that it appears to be somewhat rudderless.
Like no one's in charge?
I mean, there are people in charge. Suzanne Scott, a longtime Fox executive, is the head of Fox News Media, which incorporates Fox Business News and Network and other affiliated platforms. But you're not hearing them set parameters. It's not that you want them to dictate what people say, but you'd think that they would say, hey, look, folks, we need to honor throughout our news and opinion that Biden has won this. You're not seeing any sort of command response say this is a time of national crisis. Both the challenge to the election was a national crisis, and last week, during the assault on the Capitol, that is a moment of national crisis. And you saw Fox basically cut away from a lot of the impeachment debate. Instead, you saw them spend an extraordinary amount of time about social media deplatforming of President Trump and his associated supporters, and treating that as though that is a crisis. Now, I actually think there's some interesting free speech implications to that, but I don't think that's more important than an entire insurrection against the seat of the legislative branch of federal government. And although there are people reporting on that for Fox, that is not what you would take away from their coverage.
You're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Sam Sanders, talking now with NPR media correspondent David Folkenflik. We are discussing the future of Fox News and where that network goes now that Trump is out of the White House. I'm thinking back to when I first discovered Fox News. I was like a high school junior, and I had not been into the news at all before, but the story of Elian Gonzalez broke, and it was like a saga. And I remember turning on my TV to watch and see what was going on, and the first news channel that I got to was Fox News. So I began to watch Fox News voraciously, and I remember like a lot of reporters talking about facts. And the Fox News that you're talking about today seems very, very far removed from that place. There's been an evolution of Fox, and it seems to have happened at a breakneck pace under Donald Trump. Can you talk briefly about how much Trump changed Fox News itself, and how far it has gone, perhaps, from the role that Rupert Murdoch might have conceived for the network years ago?
So it's such an interesting thing. You talk about the question of getting away from reporting in fact, and I would say, to be fair, that their reporters have done a very good straight-ahead job of reporting on all the individual claims of fraud and the larger question, and taken efforts to debunk it. But there's a shriveling of what the news hole occupies compared to the opinion space, which was always major, but there's a shriveling of that. And also I think there's a degradation of what you see as the news space, in that they now take a lot of clips from their top opinion hosts and inject it into their so-called news programming, so that the actual news hour,
They call it news.
yeah, and then they're like, well, what do you say about that? And then it allows them to have segments that are essentially opinion inside what are technically news programs. So the newsiness of the news side has also been diminished as well. And don't think that that's not noticed internally by journalists and producers there. In terms of what Rupert Murdoch wanted, he saw an appetite in an audience for people who believed that they were not served by the mainstream media, particularly on the right and culturally conservative. He was accompanied by his executive, Roger Ailes. And I mention Ailes because Ailes has been so important with that, because he stoked that grievance. It was part of the network's formula on and off the air, was to stoke that sense of grievance, so that no matter how valid or not valid it was, it would only feel more accentuated. Murdoch and his other properties in his other parts of the world has always wanted to have a shape in influencing a role in influencing and shaping politics, policy, and personalities. And the one thing he's never had in the U.S. in the way that he's had it in his native Australia and in Britain, where he's been so influential, has been like a bat phone to the White House. Now, he is kind of contemptuous of Trump.
Yeah.
Murdoch knew Trump from tabloid days in New York City, when Trump wanted to be famous through the tabloids, and from just sort of being out and about in the town. And he realized that with Trump, he could have a bad phone. So initially he was kind of skeptical of it, was not his candidate for the Republican primaries. Trump ascends. The summer of 2016, I mean, it's all like a movie. Roger Ailes, who's,
Or a TV
tyrant.
show. Succession.
Sorry, go ahead. Very much like that. But Ailes, gets knocked out because it turns out he has been operating Fox as a place to groom young women for incredible level of sexual harassment, and at times it is alleged sexual assault. So he is fired. So Rupert decides, I'm going to run it for a while, and I'm going to throw in my lot with Donald Trump. And you know what? He and Trump were on the phone all the time. He goes, quietly to the White House in ways that aren't reported. The White House decides not to release visitor logs in the way that's been done in recent decades, so you can't document it as well. But I did stories early on in the administration in 2017 showing that they were tied, and they were talking very frequently. So suddenly, what Murdoch has is a line into the White House that he's never had before. The compromise he's had to make is it's a candidate he doesn't believe in.
Yeah. So then, if the relationship between Fox News and Trump is frayed right now, to say the least, does what's going on there represent like an existential crisis for Fox, or just like a bump along the road? Is there a moment a year or two from now where Fox's viewing audience has forgotten about Trump and they're totally Team Fox again? Or has this fundamentally changed the way that Fox News will operate in the conservative media space?
I mean, in some ways, it depends on its leadership and it depends on its personalities. In the absence of leadership, people like Sean Hannity just do whatever they want. And people like Lou Dobbs do whatever they want. And, you know, in the absence of very strong leadership being exerted, they've got very strong personalities. And, you know, the Trump complains all he wants, but, you know, who did he give a statement to about the importance of there being a peaceful transfer of power ultimately? He gives that to Fox News now that he doesn't have a Twitter feed. He's very tightly tethered to Sean Hannity, one of his closest advisors off the air, as well as one of his biggest champions on it. You know, their most popular hosts are among the most sympathetic voices out there for him. So he still needs them, and he probably needs them more than they need him.
You know, when I think about what we did wrong over the last few years, I think the biggest mistake we all made, all of us in the news media, we let Donald Trump set all of our news agendas all the time. I recall that time in the first year of his presidency where before any assignment editor would assign a story to anyone, before any newsroom would go about their day gathering news, they would wait to see what Trump tweeted, and that would dictate the day. Donald Trump for a long time was the editor-in-chief of every newsroom in America, and it meant that we all spent a lot of time chasing things that weren't real. And I hope that, after this, we can slow down as an industry and look for the stories that matter and not let politicians set our day, right? And I don't know if we're prepared to do that because I think everyone is used to the quick metabolism of news right now. Everything has to be breaking news. Every 5 minutes, a new headline has to happen. We're primed for it, but I would hope that we just slow down a bit after all this.
I think that's very fair. I don't think that Biden is going to operate in the same way, and therefore the dopamine won't be dispatched in that, in quite that pattern, rhythm, and cadence. But I think that's absolutely right. Look, if you think about the Washington Post, you know, the Post has, I think, been more restrained and careful than the Times on a lot of its reporting in certain ways. And that said, if you go to its website, sometimes you see 6 takes on the same story. Why is that? That's because Jeff Bezos's analytics will tell you that you're gonna, you know, quintuple traffic that way. But it's not necessary. Like, they did have 1 or 2 stories already. Like, that's fine. But they saw if there's appetite, they're gonna feed that. So, you know, there are ways in which it shapes, distorts, and contorts news judgment, even by people who are doing honorable work.
Thanks again to NPR media correspondent David Folkenflik for that chat. If you want a longer version of this chat, including David discussing whether or not Trump may run his own media network one day, you can check out the podcast feed for this show. It's been a minute from NPR.